Hello and welcome to our list of favorite plants to use if you're landscaping here in Monument, Colorado at an elevation of 7,000 feet. There are lots more great choices out there, but these are the ones that we love for being perennial, so that you can plant it once and enjoy it for years to come. These plants have medium to low water needs. I love the low water users, also known as water-wise, because here in Monument the water we use in our landscapes comes from groundwater, which is a non-renewable resource. Low water or water-wise usually means that they can survive with a watering of once a week or less if there's rainfall, so that's always great. These plants are all hardy enough to survive in U.S. hardiness zone 4 and at our 7,000 foot elevation. We have some pretty harsh environmental conditions, such as high winds, extreme temperature fluctuations, challenging soil, just to name a few. These plants are resilient enough, once established, to withstand all of that. About half of them are pollinator friendly, so you gotta love that. And lastly, this is something almost everyone in our area will have to contend with at times. These selections are deer resistant. They're the most deer resistant plants that I have found. There's plenty of wonderful plants that you can grow here in Monument, but unless it's in your backyard behind a 6-foot privacy fence, you'll probably want to stick with these. I arranged this list in a general order of bloom time, so the ones you see first are the ones that are probably going to bloom early on, like in June. First one on our list is Rocky Mountain Penstemon. I specified here Penstemon stricus is the one. This is sort of a Goldilocks version of Penstemon. There's a lot of different Penstemons out there, and they're all pretty awesome, but this one is the best for our area specifically because it handles the cold winters and the heat of the summer really well. It doesn't require a lot of water and all of that, and it's one of our natives, and so it doesn't mind the rocky soil that we have around here. It also seems to like to be next to a stone or a sidewalk, and it won't flop over when it's blooming, so I usually just leave it where it wants to bloom. It doesn't seem to be too intrusive. It also doesn't mind to have gravel as mulch instead of wood mulch. And the bumblebees really love this plant, so this one really gets my is one of my absolute favorites for all those reasons, and that's my little symbol of it being one of our Colorado natives. Second one, German Iris. Gosh, this plant is really tough. It's quite the survivalist. It can survive drought, and it will just sort of stop blooming and go dormant if it's not getting enough water, but then if you start watering it again, it tends to come back to life, and there's been cases where we didn't even know there were irises in that landscape until it started to get water again, and then they started to grow again. Gives you a nice upright element when it's not blooming, so it sort of always earns its keep in the garden as far as I'm concerned, and there's just an endless number of colors and varieties of German Iris. Another one is Siberian Iris. Siberia, of course, that really tells you that it's good in our cold winters. I never see it bloom quite this much as this one over here. But this is a smaller plant, and the leaves are a lot more skinny, sort of elegant, and so it's nice in some smaller flower beds if you need a nice vertical element. Number 3, Snow in Summer. Talk about a tough plant. This will spread pretty aggressively. It won't be like a weed, but you want to give it plenty of space. It's really good in some of those problematic areas where nothing else seems to want to grow, and in the I'd say about late June, it gets covered in these white flowers that are really pretty. And then it looks nice if you trim those dead flowers off when it's done blooming, and you just get this nice bed of sage green plant. And it really will fill in and spread nicely, so give it plenty of space. Next we have Salvia, also known as meadow sage. This shouldn't be confused with our annual sages that look really similar to this. This is the perennial sage. The pollinators really love this plant, and so it's best not to plant it next to a sidewalk or somewhere where someone might bump into some of those foraging bees. And sometimes when this is done blooming, if you shear off all the dead flower spikes, sometimes it will bloom again later in summer. Oriental poppy. These are the large poppies. They're also known as giant poppies. This is the perennial version of poppy, and they also do well with a rock next to them, kind of interspersed in their landscape. It's hard to say why, but they seem to appreciate the thermal mass that gives them over their root zone, and I'll see them often popping up either next to a rock or in a gravel area. These really are large blooms that you get. They're about as big as my hand when it's open, and since this is the perennial version, I actually decided to include one of the annuals. Annuals are Icelantic poppy or Shirley poppy, and these are really nice because they're also very hardy, but they kind of come up in all these endless varieties because they tend to interbreed. See all these bees that are on these? The bees will be all over the flowers for about a half of a day until they've picked all of the pollen off of these blooms. They just go nuts for it really quickly, and in the process they're spreading all the genetics around, and so what you get are some really fun combinations between the reds, the pinks, and the whites, and sometimes you get tie-dye effects or fades from one color to another, and this is the first time I had seen this. It was a half and half flower. But these are really great in rock gardens or gravel mulch beds. They tend to pop up. Where they volunteer to go is usually right in a funny spot right next to a rock. This one was between a stepping stone and the concrete, so it's kind of a funny choice that it made. But if you're willing to let these reseed and kind of have their way with where they pop up, it can be really fun to see all the different colors. Next we have sulphur flower, also known as sulphur buckwheat. The plant itself is very low growing, only a few inches, and it'll make this nice low growing mat. But when it blooms, it's about 8 to 10 inches, and it gets these sulphur yellow flowers on it that the pollinators do like. This is a really tough plant, and it looks really nice in the winter because the leaves turn kind of a burgundy purple color. It's almost an evergreen, and so that's nice. It gives you something to look at in the winter, and this is one of our natives. I love this plant. It's also low water. Anything that's a native usually doesn't need a lot of water. Here we have carpet bugle. This specific variety is known as Burgundy glow. There's a few different kinds. It doesn't get these pink flowers on it. That's a different plant, but this is a great ground cover plant. It doesn't look that great from far away. 100 feet away it sort of tends to blend into the mulch, but up close it has a lot of interest, and it's a really tough plant. Kind of spreads gently in your landscape. Here's a little bit more back here. This plant also does well in the shade, which we love to have those options for shade-loving plants. Lamb's ear is a great option. This specific one is called Helen von Stein. I really like it because it tends to really behave itself in the landscape. It doesn't send up the flower spikes or spread the way that other lamb's ears tend to do. It stays put, and it creates this tidy little mound, and so it works pretty well as a border, or on its own it'll start to look like a small bush, kind of in a dome shape. It's just really nice looking plant. The other ones are more of a sage green, and they will get flower spikes on them, and they will spread, but they're lower water, so they have their uses too. I think this one, Helen von Stein, is my favorite though. Let's talk about some ground covers. The first one is Turkish Veronica. There's lots of different kinds of Veronica. This one specifically is really low growing. It's great for even in between stepping stones. Gets these little bitty blue flowers on them. In the winter, it's almost evergreen. It will take on a purplish look eventually. Here's one that has some frost on it already. It's starting to turn colors. Another word for this is Speedwell. But here's another version of Veronica that doesn't look anything like the Turkish Veronica. This is called Aztec Gold, and it's this real bright chartreuse plant around the edges of this bed. This on the sides, that's the second year growth, and on the front, has only just been planted that year. These will get little purple flowers popping up, and if you want to keep it looking tidy like that, you just shear them off once they're done blooming, and it will continue to look nice like that. These need a little bit more water to remain tidy looking like this, but they can survive on fairly low water also in a rock garden. So the thyme family, just about every kind of thyme works really well here. This is woolly thyme. It's a very low-growing plant, and it has sort of velvety leaves. It doesn't flower very much, as you can see. That's not really what it's planted for. It's great for a ground cover or in a rock garden. And in the winter, it turns this really nice purplish burgundy color. Gives you a little bit of interesting things to look at. Other thymes are red thyme. There's culinary thyme that you can use to season your food. There's even lemon thyme. And most of those other kinds of thyme, they are blooming, so the pollinators like them. And they also turn interesting colors in the winter. Ice plant. This is a really fun plant. This is what you're seeing down here in the bottom. Another really great ground cover. The hardy yellow is the one with the yellow flower. It's already going out of bloom in this picture. Normally it would be covered in yellow flowers if it was in its season. In this picture it's already going out, and the pink variety is coming in. These do really well sharing the space with others. So over here you can see a thyme plant, and here's a hops plant, and it'll surround that plant, but it won't just overtake any of the other plants in your landscape. So it's fun that it shares the space and it fills in all the gaps. And it will kind of swallow up rocks, though. If you see this, there's actually a hidden rock under here. And this is a really fun plant because it is evergreen. It will turn some fun colors. Here's another picture of it in a rock garden. It will turn some fun colors in the winter. In the fall, this was what it looks like, with some different oranges and yellows and reds, but then by the end of winter it's probably going to be fully purple, sort of a nice dark lavender purple. And now we have Shasta daisies. There's plenty of varieties of Shasta daisy that works well here, and it'll be a nice taller element in your garden. You know, make a statement from pretty far away with the daisies. I'd say off the top of my head the best one we have is Alaska, but there really are a lot to choose from. There are even some double-headed varieties that maybe are not as strong of growers, but they still do plenty well here. Catmint is this is what you see right here and over here in this landscape. Catmint is something that it probably wins the prize for the longest blooming plant of any of them that are on this list. It just feels like it blooms all summer, and that probably relates to how much water you give it. It can survive on very low water, but it will bloom more if you give it moderate to low water. In this picture you can see some of the other examples of plants that I've already talked about. Here's buckwheat. Here's some of that Icelantic poppy doing its own thing, and in the background we have the yellow, the hardy yellow ice plant, and that's kind of going all along here. This is some thyme right here that is already starting to go out of bloom, and over on this side is Veronica, Turkish Veronica. Yarrow. Oh, we love yarrow, but you want to make sure that you get the sterile hybrid version, because if it's one of our native varieties of yarrow, it kind of turns into a thug in your garden. It will want to spread everywhere. And my favorite of the sterile varieties is Moonshine, but there's also a handful of other ones to choose from. These bloom for a long time. They're really tall and strong plants, and so they're best sort of at the back of the perennial bed, where other things can be in front of them. And they're another one of them that looks pretty good when they're done blooming. If you shear it off, it will keep your garden looking tidy. Fairly low water user also. Number 15, Monarda, also known as bee balm. This one is our native bee balm. Monarda fistulosa has these nice light lavender flowers that the pollinators go nuts for. That's bumblebees, native bees, and hummingbirds all really love this plant. Here's a picture of it from far off. The flowers are so light that they almost look white, so they go really well in a landscape that has other pinks and purples, and this sage green tends to look the best with it. This is one of our natives, of course, and so that means it'll be lower water. It will grow with a lot less fuss, and you can see how tall these grow, almost to 5 feet, and so they're great at the back of your landscape. There's also other kinds of Monarda that are more cultivated and more intensely bred. A lot of those are red, and they're also very tall. They're a little bit less resilient, though. They need more water, and they tend to get mildew on their leaves if they're being watered from above, like from a sprinkler. So that's something to keep in mind. But the hummingbirds also really love these, and they're still a fairly hardy plant. Here's another favorite of ours, Echinacea, also known as purple coneflower or prairie coneflower. These are pretty tall, they stand about 4 feet when they're really happy. They're low water, and the butterflies and the bees do like them. In the winter, if you leave them standing, the small birds like finches will feed on the seeds. They also sometimes get these fun little gnome hats when it snows. So you might consider leaving them up through the winter. And this is one of our natives. That means low water and low fuss. Here we have Agastache, also known as mint hyssop. Oh, there it is. This is our native one. This nice salmon colored. It kind of fades to a nice purple, and with the sage green leaves. The hummingbirds also just go nuts for this plant, and it's a real low water, low fuss plant. There are other kinds of Agastache out there that are more of a hybrid of Korean mint and things. They're also very tall and large plants, but they look totally different. This one I took a picture of because it had about 7 butterflies on it all at the same time. This is taking up a lot of space. It's a good filler in the back of your garden. What you're seeing here is about a 6-foot, 7-foot bed, and there's only 4 plants total in there, so it really did a good job filling it, and it's a very tall plant. But this one is our native, Agastache rupestris. Here's the last one on our list. We have hardy Plumbago, sometimes just called Plumbago. It's a low-growing plant. It works well as a ground cover, although it's probably at its tallest is about 8 inches. The thing I love about this plant is that it blooms so late, usually after it has already started to get cold in the fall, and it gets these beautiful little blue flowers that the butterflies really like. Sometimes there are populations of butterflies that are migrating through the area that late in the season, and there's very little blooming at that time. But also this plant just gets some really gorgeous colors. When it starts to turn cold, you'll get a whole kaleidoscope of purples and burgundies and oranges that the leaves turn, and very late growing, so often when most other stuff has died away, your Plumbago will still be going. It's also late to emerge in the spring. You probably won't even see it till late June, so don't give up on it if you think that it hasn't come back. It's probably still dormant because it grows so late in the year. And that's going to be the last one on our list for today. This has been a quick list. If you want something if you want to learn more about the plants that do well in our area, and maybe you want a more extensive list, you can go to thetownofmonument.org, and we'll have a plant list there that has even more information on how much water these plants require, how deer resistant they are. There's also annuals and other ground cover plants on that list. You can go to townofmonument.org and put in the search bar plant list, and wherever it is on the website at the time, it should be in several different places on our website, but you'll be able to find it quickest by putting it into the search bar. So thanks for joining me today, and keep an eye out for some other fun videos that the Town of Monument will be posting throughout the year. And everyone, take care and be well.